Okay, so we'll begin. This is the last lecture of the small series that we began several weeks ago, which I like to call the summary of the mitzvot, where the Navi basically says, what does Hashem ask of you? Well, He asks of us to fulfill the 613 mitzvot. But if we were to summarize them, He summarized them in three ways. He says the first one is asot mishpat, is to do that which is just. And that, of course, applies between us and our fellow Jew. To be fair, to be honest, everything that has to do with justice. Many of the mitzvot depend on that, and that is why that is emphasized. The second idea is ahavat chesed, the pursuit of kindness. But it's not just the pursuit of the kindness, it is to love kindness. It is to make kindness second nature to us, not to do it because we need to do it, but because it's the correct thing to do, because it is something so important. After all, the entire creation is one act of love and kindness, and if we were to emulate God's ways, we would basically involve ourselves all our life, every day of our life, in pursuing this beautiful midah called chesed, of which there are many examples in the Torah. So a great deal of the Torah involves chesed, which also relates to the relationship between us and our fellow Jew. However, the third area, ve'atzneh alechet im Elohecha, is the third mitzvah, the third idea of being modest in the ways of Hashem. And that is what we're going to speak about tonight. What does it mean to be modest? People associate modesty with the dress code, but as you're going to see, modesty is much more than just how you're supposed to dress and how you're supposed to look. In order to understand a little bit of what modesty means, we have to turn to the Orchot Tzadikim, which makes a very powerful statement. The Sefer Orchot Tzadikim, which is a sefer about Musar, Jewish ethics and morality, makes a very important statement. Hasechel busha, v'habusha sechel. Sechel, which is the mind, the human intellect, is what distinguishes us from the animal kingdom. We are very different than animals, even though we have something that is animal about us, and that is the physical body. We have a neshama. We're endowed with a soul, a living soul, that is divine. It is spiritual. And that enables us not only to exercise free will, it gives us the power of speech, amongst other things. The human being, however, is distinguished by the fact that he has this mind, which is, of course, something to do with the neshama as well. It is not just a great piece of jelly that's sitting in the middle of the skull. This human intellect that we call the sechel, mevi lebusha. Sechel brings about or requires shame. The intrinsic nature of sechel, of the mind that the human being has, automatically requires that this human being understand the concept of busha, of shame. When one therefore demonstrates shame, it is indicative that he has sechel, or that this shame is emanating from something that we call sechel, the mind. Otherwise, where does shame come from? Even though it's true, you may ask the same question about love and fear. Love and fear of Hashem, not fear of human beings or fear of other creatures. There are certain things that are not built into the physical body necessarily, that are somehow belong to the subconscious mind, which of course comes from the neshama. But we're going to talk about is busha tonight, or tzniut, which has to do with busha, and not about the other ideas. But this idea of shame is directly related to this capacity that we have called the mind. For you to better understand what I mean, just turn to the beginning of Sefer Bereshit. And when does Adam and Chava discover that they are naked, that they should be dressed? After they've eaten from the Etz HaDaat. Right? After they've eaten from the tree they were not supposed to eat. After they've eaten from the fruit of the tree that gives one da'at, understanding. And once they've acquired this understanding, it means that they've acquired a certain level of being able to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Even though this is a lecture in itself, why did Hashem keep it from them? Ultimately, they were going to get it. But anyway, this obviously, Etz Hadat, introduced them to something that they were unaware of before. It's not that they had no da'at whatsoever. They had a certain level of da'at. Nevertheless, it introduced them to a certain facet of life. And that facet is their physical body is pretty much animal. Here, they were on a certain level where they recognize how pure they are, how special they are, how they're godly, they're divine. They're different than anything else around. And all of a sudden, this da'at introduced them to this idea that there's something animal about them too, which is what brought them to immediately cover it up, which immediately brought this feeling of shame that they have to close themselves. Just think about it. Do you ever think about why does one feel embarrassed to go to the restroom in front of people? He wants to be behind doors. He doesn't want to be seen. Why are people not going around naked, even though I know in some countries they do? And in some beaches it's okay, it's acceptable. But for the most part, most human beings do not want to be seen that way. What's the reason? What's the psychological reason for this shame, for this embarrassment? And the answer is because it reminds them of their behemiyut. When one sees his physical body, certain parts of the physical body, the parts that compare him to an animal. 2 legs don't compare him to an animal. Animals have 4. I know human beings look a little bit like monkeys. I know some people want to say that, but human beings are very, very different than monkeys. But they are reminded of the animal in them when they see certain parts of them, and they want to cover it up. And that covering up came about as a result of achila me'etz hadat, from eating from that fruit that was forbidden. And as a result of that, they received a certain level of understanding that, which brought about shame, which is a good thing. And that shame is what forces them to be somewhat modest. In other words, to not be completely naked, at least in public not. Rabbis tell us that Am Yisrael received a greater dose of this busha. Am Yisrael is known as Baishanim Rachmanim Gomle Chasadim. They are bashful, they are kind-hearted, they are compassionate. And when did they receive this greater dose of busha? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to them, spoke to them, when they've experienced Matan Torah in Har Sinai, it was an incredible experience, an unforgettable experience, that we haven't had one since then, and we will not have one till Mashiach comes very soon, to hear the voice of Hashem. And later on, when Hashem explains himself as to why he did that in such an incredible way, it's not only for the experience to be unique, for after all, the Torah says no other religion can make that claim, that God appeared to them. Everybody says, well, I had a dream last night, God came to me. It's all was one person making a claim, no witnesses to the fact. Besides being an impressive presentation, and it was convincing that everybody said Naaseh v'nishma, besides that, Hashem says in the Torah, part of what I did was in order to accomplish something very important. In order that his fear, the fear of God, should be on your face all the days. The fear of God on your face, yes, the shame. That you should have this high degree of shame. For if you do, it will help you in not coming to sin. As the rabbis tell us, many, many times one does not commit a sin because he's ashamed to be caught. So on the lowest level of not wanting to commit a sin, what is preventing one? Well, obviously there are some sins we're afraid of being caught because of the authorities. They're going to punish us. But I'm talking about the sins where we're not going to be penalized by the Bet Din or by some courts. It is a sin that we wish not to do because, on the lowest level, of the busha, of being caught. There's some degree of shame that one does not want to be embarrassed for doing it, and that's what holds him back. And that's good. Hashem says, I therefore did what I did in order that you have continuously the bare minimum of shame, of not wanting Chas v'Shalom to go against my will. So ever since, Am Yisrael does have a higher degree of shame. When we talk about tzniut, modesty, as the Prophet says, "Atznei alechet im Elokecha," modesty is a very powerful word. True modesty, however, is not external, as most people think. It is really internal. As you will soon see, it is not just how one dresses and how one behaves on the surface. It's really something internal. Just like the midah of busha is an internal midah. It's something about the individual himself, regardless of whether there are people around. Because if there are people around, then it's something that's being forced upon him. The trick is for a person to be who he really is in his private quarters. And that is why the rabbis tell us, Le'olam yeh adam yireh shamayim baseter kemo bagalui. One should always strive to be God-fearing in his private quarters at home when he's by himself, just as much as he is in public. In public, he has an incentive. He wants to make a good impression. He's embarrassed or whatever. But in his bathroom, in his bedroom, in his own private home, especially when no one is around, what incentive is there? Because he is watching. That's why. Well, not everybody's cognizant of that he is watching all the time. They don't see somebody watching over them. They were told in school, they once read about it, that God is everywhere, that he watches and knows everything you're doing and everything you're thinking. But that's not enough to make them afraid, to make them embarrassed. So the rabbis tell us, remember, this is something that you should strive for your own integrity. If you're really a true God-fearing person, you're going to be God-fearing everywhere. And that is why you will find in the Shulchan Aruch halachot of how to conduct yourself in the restroom. Nobody sees you. The doors are locked. Nobody sees you. Even in your restroom, when no one sees you, there's a requirement of being modest. Even in your own bedroom, if no one else is there, there's also a requirement of how to dress and how to undress. But nobody sees me. Still, modesty is something internal. And if it's internal, you have to demonstrate that wherever you are, in whatever situation you are. So therefore, in order to understand the words of the Prophet, "Ve'atznei alechet im Elohecha," what did it really mean to be modest with God? It meant modest with your Yirat Shamayim. In other words, demonstrate your fear of God everywhere, in all kinds of situations, wherever you are. Modest in your ways, in your conduct. Modest in your conduct means modest in your speech, modest in your dress code. It also means not to brag about the performance of mitzvah. One of the levels of tzedakah that is very, very high level of charity is to give tzedakah anonymously. The poor man does not know who he got it from. The one who gave it does not know who he gave it to. Now, I can understand that the poor man does not know who he got it from, then we save him, we spare him his dignity. But why shouldn't the one who gives it know who he's giving it to? Well, it's possible to know, but if you don't know, it's even better. You don't have a chance to take credit. I've helped this man. Lo litravrev, not to brag about the mitzvot. That's also a form of modesty. So we have modesty in the way we dress, of course, but since modesty is something internal, if one possesses it, it will be noted also in his speech, in his conduct. He's careful on how he deals with people. That's all Hatznei Alechet im Elokecha, because we're talking about his Yirat Shamayim. Hatznei Alechet with Hashem. It's not only between man and his fellow Jew as the other two mitzvot were. This is a purely our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in order to prove it, we conduct all our business matters in this way that we call tzniut, modesty. Modesty in the ways of Hashem also means to be flexible. It's the opposite of stubbornness. Am Yisrael, of course, is known for Am Kshe Oref, not being very, very flexible, but being very stiff-necked or stubborn. Tzniut, therefore, is emphasized to remind us that one has to be easygoing. Modest meaning not so demanding, not so exacting. Even though we are exacting in our mitzvot with Hashem, but when it comes to Yirat Hashem, the fear of Hashem, we have to be careful that we show a certain degree of a willingness to adapt to the situation, not in a lenient way, chas v'shalom, but to realize that we are being tested. We are being tested all times. One is always being tested in all kinds of situations, and it may require of him a tremendous amount of courage and strength to be able to withstand those challenges. And if a person is easygoing, in other words, the Yirat Shamayim comes to him easily because it's internal in him, it's not something that is forced upon him, he's truly a modest, God-fearing, sincere person, then he will be able to adapt to the situation and say, yes, I can handle this, I can do this, it's not difficult, I'll do it out of love. And keep this point in mind, because I'm going to share with you some incredible stories later on that prove this point. An internal, beautiful, pure modesty, not somebody who's so stiff, right? That even though stiffness is sometimes good, because the stubbornness has allowed many, many Jews to perform mitzvot under difficult situations too. The stubbornness or the stiffness that I'm talking about here is the unwillingness to adapt to a situation that may require one to ignore the pressure, ignore what other people do and what other people say. Therefore, be modest with Hashem, in other words, be easygoing with your Yirat Shamayim. Don't fall. Don't let it, Chas v'Shalom, the pressure or the influence of society take you away from walking modestly, from being sincere, from being attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These are some of the ideas about what this modesty means. We will see, of course, examples, really real-life examples later on. Just another quick idea of where modesty can be seen or expressed is in Midat HaIstapkut. Midat HaIstapkut means not to covet, not to desire many of the luxuries or excesses of life. And when a person really is modest in Yirat Hashem, in other words, he is pretty much conducting himself in that way in every respect of his life, he will not want to covet all these things. It's a contradiction. Modesty, if it's internal, is something so beautiful and spiritual. And as a result of being so beautiful and spiritual, it de-emphasizes automatically the physical part of the human body. The physical is no longer prominent. It is the neshama. It is the beauty of the neshama that is being emphasized much more. As a result of that, the physical body is being covered, is secondary, not as important. So midat ha'istapkut will result from perfecting the tzniut, the internal tzniut. And as the rabbis put it in a different way, in a different perspective, one who's working on his midot, on his character, he wants to refine his character, he wants to have better self-control of himself. And they use the example of gava, of arrogance. How do you get rid of arrogance? Something which is very difficult. Everybody has some degree of self-esteem and self-worth. Rabbis tell us, if a person is very, very weak in the area of arrogance, if he begins to conduct himself b'dibur, b'machshava, b'maaseh, in all three areas, in thought, in speech, and in conduct, with a little bit of humbleness, it will help him remove the gava. Similar to what the Rambam says, you go to the other extreme. But this has to be done in the three areas of thoughts, of speech. How do you do anava in speech? You speak more softly. In your dress code, you don't wear something ostentatious, something fancy. With something more simple. In other words, you force yourself to take, to be lower key, as they say, and that will bring about anava, the humbleness. However, the other way around is also true, unfortunately. One who is very, very strong in pritzut meaning that he's very unrefined, very wild, whether it's in his language, foul language that he uses, or in the way he dresses, in a way that he doesn't care. It's all of that is called pritzut. Pritzut means it's wide open. It's uncontrolled, unrestrained. Whether it's the language or the dress, this type of character or behavior will lead to all the midot haraot. It will lead to gava, it will lead to lashon hara, it will lead to ta'avot, all the terrible midot. So, anava will bring about the removal of gava, of course, of all the bad midot, and pritzut, the opposite, will bring all the terrible midot. Why is this subject so important? The idea of tzniut. Torah makes a very, very strong statement by telling us, kedoshim tiyu, that we should be a holy nation. And when the Torah tells us kedoshim tiyu, it does not only tell us how to go about becoming holy, and that the mitzvot will help us achieve holiness, it also tells us, in other words, many, many times, that the reason why Hashem wants us to strive to be holy is because Hashem doesn't want us to be like the rest of the world. And Torah tells us very, very, very clearly, Lo lidamot lagoyim, do not in any way try to become like them. You are different. You're never going to be like them. On the level of the soul, you're even different. Therefore, be careful not to copy their ways and their customs and not to associate with them too much so you don't learn from them. Is it possible to learn from them? Yes, of course. Human beings learn from each other. So therefore, be careful. And what will help you stay apart? Kedoshim tiyu. Obviously, strive to be holy, strive to be more elevated. And kedoshim, which means to elevate yourself, to be holy, means to be apart, to be above, to not follow the laws of nature. The law of nature is, well, my body has needs and I do what my body wants, right? That's not kadosh. Kadosh means that you control yourself. Even though you have certain needs, you regulate it. Just like husband and wife regulate the time that they're with each other according to the Torah. It's regulated. It's permissible, but it needs to be regulated. How much and when. Right? Food should also be regulated. It's not healthy for the physical body, and it's definitely not healthy for the neshama. So the Torah gives us a discipline through the mitzvot to regulate. And regulation is part of Kedusha. To elevate the physical to a higher plane. And when we make a blessing over what we eat, before we eat and after, we've also elevated the food. If we have the proper kavanah, why we're eating, then it elevates it even more. Why am I eating? Because I want to be healthy. Why you want to be healthy? Because I want to serve Hashem. Not because I want to live to 145. Right? So I'm giving the physical a purpose, a real purpose, a divine purpose. No longer is it physical. I've elevated. So kedoshim tiyu is a very, very big statement that basically tells us, you Jewish people, your focus has to be different. Whether it's in how you dress and how you eat, everything about what you do needs to be different. I want you to be different than the rest of the goyim. I don't want you just to be another nation. I have a holy mission for you. In order for you to accomplish this mission, you got to follow this diet. Let's call it the diet, right? And therefore, you have to be very careful not to be like them. Now, what's wrong with what the goyim do? The goyim don't want to be holy. Let me give you one quick example. Now, the women don't like this particular example that I give, but I have to give it anyway. It's called the example of style. You're wearing something. Did you buy what you bought, and are you wearing what you're wearing because that's the latest style? Now, be honest. Why are you wearing what you're wearing? Now, just think about it. Who decided what the style will be? Does anybody know who decides the style? Somebody sitting in an office in Paris decides what you're going to wear. Now, for some reason, 25 years ago, there was something that was beautiful. 10 years ago, it stopped being beautiful. And now, it's back in style and beautiful again. Does that make sense? Something that is truly beautiful is always beautiful. Isn't it? Something that is beautiful is always beautiful. Then why did something become fashionable, stop being fashionable, and now it's fashionable again? Am I right? Some things have been out of fashion, come back to fashion. I'm becoming an expert already. Yeah. That's because I'm married, so I guess I learn. Why? Why should it be? Because somebody made a decision. It's only because somebody made a decision. And why do you think these decisions are being made? Because it's truly beautiful? No. Had it been beautiful, it would always have remained beautiful. And I still have a hard time. I tell my wife, what you wore 20 years ago, if she still has it, it's still beautiful. Why don't you wear it? Oh, I can't wear it anymore. It's not in style, but it's beautiful. Why can't you wear it if it's beautiful? No, because it's not in style. But who decided that it's not in style? This guy sitting in an office in Paris. It doesn't make any sense. Now, what's their thinking? Their thinking is, this is the style that we want people to look at, to wear, and their whole kavanah of the goyim is lavlit et haofna, to emphasize this particular style, to get people to like it. It's very, very selfish. It's a very material or physical kavanah reason. It's not because it's beautiful or not beautiful. It could be ugly. I know one lady in Mexico that started wearing something many, many years ago that was the latest style. And I asked her, why are you wearing this? She says, I really hate it, but I have to wear it because that's the latest style. I said, oh, wow, I give up. That's already too much for somebody is wearing something that they hate. They don't like it, but that's the latest style. In other words, you're a slave, right? You're being dictated what to wear. I feel sorry for you. It has nothing to do with beauty. In other words, somebody in some office has decided that this is what people need to wear for some kavanah that he has to bring out something in them. So it's nothing to do with kedusha, nothing to do with that whatsoever. Anyway, the reason why we dress properly and we need to be modest in the dress code is obviously to cover up that which is animal, which is true, that's which brings us shame, because we are saying that the ikar, the main thing in the human being is his neshama anyway. So we don't want to overemphasize the body. We don't want to show parts of the body. As it is, we're ashamed of showing certain parts of the body. So the dress code, basically, that's what it does. When we cover ourselves properly, we're saying this is not the ikar. But some goyim feel, yes, I want to show all the curves. They want to attract. They want to do something that's not right. It's not holy, obviously. So they emphasize that which is totally unimportant, the animal in us, the physical body. But the main part of us is the neshama. Now, our tradition says very clearly that before Mashiach comes, there's going to be a big war. Now, everybody thinks that we're talking about the war of Gog and Magog. There's going to be a different kind of war. That's going to be the war of the Sitra Achara, the Tum'ah with the Kedusha. The Kabbalah says that the Tum'ah, the Sitra Achara, knows that this is the end of it. The end is coming. It will disappear. Kadosh Baruch Hu will remove it from the face of the earth. And it will fight a very, very big battle with the Kedusha. The Zohar says that at that point, it will receive assistance. The Tumah will be given assistance. All the neshamot of the Dor HaMabul, or at least some of the souls of the generation of the flood, will come down reincarnated. These were souls that were totally unrefined. These were souls that sinned in this area of lack of modesty. And the problem with this war is that this war will enter people's homes. It will not just be on the outside, where you see it. We see it in the billboards. We see it everywhere in how people dress. They don't care anymore. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, not too long ago, I didn't see what I see today. I read a newspaper occasionally back then. I didn't see words in the newspaper that today is every third word are those words, very, very ugly words. I didn't hear in the radio certain things that I hear today. So as the time is progressing, has gotten worse and worse. People have more chutzpah. As the rabbis tell us, chutzpah is geh. There will be a tremendous amount of chutzpah, not just in the speech, where children speak up, unfortunately, against their own parents sometimes, but even the way people dress. They don't care. There's no shame. The shame is lacking. So this unfortunate situation will penetrate people's homes. How? TV, newspapers, and internet. Very easily. And some people actually pay for it. The Torah says, be very careful. Don't bring this to'eva into your home. Lo tavi to'eva al betecha. Be very careful not to bring this abomination to your home. And here you have people today that not only bring it in, they pay for it. They have it cable. They don't want to miss out anything else. This is a to'eva. This is an abomination. This causes tremendous amount of damage. What kind of damage does this do? Well, first of all, imagine hearing a person giving over the news, or even an actor doing his role. A lot of what their words that are going to be said are going to be equivalent to kfirah, heresy. Okay? A lot of the words that you may hear either in a movie or in the news is going to be heresy, complete kfirah. And what's that going to do? Believe it or not, it's going to cool off your emunah. It's going to cool off or turn off the Yirat Shamayim. The Chafetz Chaim was very adamant, very, very strong, that anybody who, God forbid, has a book in his house that is kefirah, he better throw it out right away. Because just by having it in the house, it brings bad influence. There was an incredible dream that occurred in the 90s, I think it was. Somebody was in the house. A grandfather was in the house of I think it was his son or grandson, an older man, one of the students of the Chafetz Chaim. And that night, the older man, had a dream with his master, the Chafetz Chaim. He saw the Chafetz Chaim in the living room pacing back and forth and looking very upset. And when he woke up, he went to that spot and he saw a book. It was a Bible, it was a Torah, but the commentary was by one who was not religious. He was upset about it. He used to speak a lot about these Sifrei Haminim, as he used to call them, Sifrei Apikorsim, that caused tremendous amount of damage to those who have it in their home. The more so one who reads it, you don't realize it, but it can cool a person off. One of the best examples of how these things cool off is what happened in Israel during the Scud missile attack. Now, some people, Baruch Hashem, understood the great miracles that happened during the 39 missiles. But you had some newscasters who got on TV and argued with each other. So what do you say about this missile that fell over here? Was that a miracle? Or was it just a coincidence? The fact that they had a so-called argument cooled off people. Oh, it could have been a coincidence. Had they not said that, had everybody said this was obvious, clear miracles, that would have been a big Kiddush Hashem. People's emunah would have been strengthened. But if somebody introduces the possibility, and the so-called experts, that this is just a coincidence, that it happens from time to time, that cools off. By listening these words of a newscaster, you give him some credibility, and that cools you off. Oh, it could have been a coincidence. When in reality, we know that there are no coincidences. This is a beautiful, beautiful miracle. When missile after missile landed, destroyed the buildings, and the people got out unharmed. But that's what happens when people watch TV. What the TV does, amongst other things, is not only cool one off, it increases a person's ta'avot, his desires. He sees all the latest gadgets, all the latest goodies, whether it's in an advertisement or not, it has the tendency also to increase ta'avot. It destroys the midot, because you see all the most terrible midot, character, or in human nature, all the low lives, right? All the people acting or behaving the way they are, whether it's in a violent movie or in some other movie. You see homes falling apart in a soap opera, and guess what that's going to do to one's home? So this is also having a tremendous effect in Shalom Bait. Not only because of what they see. Imagine somebody who's already 35, 40 years married to his wife. She's gotten old, and he sees a beautiful actress, and he says to himself, well, now I'm stuck with this. He sees a beautiful actress. I'm stuck with this. Or she says the same thing. He's balding and heavier. Yes, it's tempting. People do that who have no controls, who don't have Yirat Shamayim and Torah in their home, no Kedusha. They get tired. It says, okay, let me try something else. After all, it's the latest style is to get divorced. It's back to style, right? It's in style. So why not do it? When did people get divorced in the past? It was once in the blue moon. Somebody heard that there was one in the community or two. But every time I speak to the rabbi, one of the rabbis who's in charge of Gittin, he has one or two or three every week. That's terrible. Never heard that before. Part of that has to do with the influence that they see or they absorb from the street, from the TV. It cools off the emunah, reduces the amount of Yirat Shamayim in the home, causes tremendous amount of problems in Shlom Bayit when one is glued to the TV or to the internet instead of being glued to his wife and to his kids, spending more time with them. The attention is being robbed. And what about the Bitul Torah and Bitul Zman, precious time that we have, such a precious commodity called time, and we're wasting it on shtuyot, on nonsense. Well, 1 minute. Maybe I'm going to guess your question. Somebody's going to ask, for sure somebody here is going to ask, but wait a minute, there's so much good stuff. Was that going to be your question?
Yeah. Thousands of kosher websites.
Baruch Hashem. Yeah.
Millions of shiurim online.
Yeah. Right. So everybody heard the question. It's a good question, right? There's a lot of good stuff on TV. So I'll talk about the internet separately. But no. Let's talk about TV first, because I have a nice mashal for that. There's a lot of good things on TV. The Discovery Channel. I don't know how good that is, but they say it's good. So what's the answer to that? I like to give the following answer. Imagine you went to buy a puppy. Your kid says he wants a puppy. And the owner says, okay, this is a very good puppy. He'll make a good pet. He only has one problem. Once a week he bites. He's going to bite you once a week. Are you going to buy it? He's a good puppy. He'll make a good pet, but once a week he has this in it. He bites, and it hurts. It really hurts. Nobody would buy it. The TV, of course, has some good things, but once in a while it bites. It kills. Yeah, I'm going to change the channel. Yeah, but before you go there to change the channel, you already saw an ugly, unsanua, unmodest advertisement. Commercial, as they call it, before you had a chance to even move it. And how many scenes in movies today are unclean? Many. In the olden days, perhaps things were a little bit cleaner, but again, things have changed. Today you have to put scenes that are very not modest. And even though it's only once in a while, that once in a while is very damaging. And as far as the internet is concerned, those who truly have a need for it, it is a very powerful tool. It does disseminate knowledge, and it's incredible what you can do with it. You have to be very careful. You have to perhaps get some good filters, but especially be careful with your children, because they can easily get carried away. Hopefully an adult who's a little bit more matured and settled and knows the dangers, hopefully will have a little bit more of self-control. But in order to avoid any problems, I recommend that any adult or anybody, if he needs to use the internet, it should be in a public place. In other words, the doors should be opened, not the doors locked, so that in case his Yetzer Hara tempts him to see something wrong, if the doors are open, he will not easily fall into that trap. Every human being, unfortunately, can fall into the trap of the Yetzer, no matter how big of a Torah scholar he is, no matter how much Yirat Shamayim he has, he can fall. And especially when you know that the internet is full of spam, I think it's called, and they sometimes pop up against your will. What do you do then? You know, you see it, of course, and you see it against your will, and it's very, very difficult to control. So you have to be extra careful. So, you know, I'm not going to tell you not to have it. I think it is a very powerful tool, but you have to be extremely careful not to fall in the trap of the Yetzer. But a TV in the home is completely useless and is very, very damaging, and no reason whatsoever to have one.
There's a website called Kosher YouTube. It just came out.
Oh, really?
It's endorsed by Rabbanim.
Yeah.
And it's full of shiurim with videos.
Baruch Hashem, yeah. See, Baruch Hashem, hopefully there'll be so much kosher stuff that they won't be tempted to go to the non-kosher stuff. But that's what these things can do. They can bring about, unfortunately, a tremendous amount of challenges in the area of arayot, of immorality, letzanut, which means mockery, in other words, or things that take away the seriousness that we should have, the positive attitude that we should have towards wanting to do mitzvot. This tends to cool off. And kfira and heresy. Now, when one has this in the home, he doesn't realize that besides all the damage that it's doing, the Torah says, "V'lo yeh becha ervat davar v'shav me'acharecha." If chas v'shalom there's something immoral in one's home, the Shekhinah goes away. It does not stay. The blessing therefore goes with it. It is therefore not a very good idea to have these things in the home because it can affect the blessing in one's home. There's a very important pasuk in Tehillim that says as follows: "Ashrei ish yireh Hashem b'mitzvotav chafetz me'od." Fortunate is a person who's truly God-fearing, that very much wants to do Hashem's mitzvot. If he's truly God-fearing, he will be blessed to have very good children. Gibor ba'aretz yeh zar'o dor yesharim yivorach hom ve'osher beveto v'tzidkato omedet la'ad. Many blessings. But one of those blessings is that he will have good, righteous children. So the rabbis explain the conduct of the parents in home, especially the conduct of the mother, if she's tsanua, if she's modest, affects the children in a very, very big way. What kind of neshamot she will bring down, what kind of children she will have, how God-fearing they will be, depends very, very much on the modesty of the mother. There's a famous story in the Midrash of a woman by the name of Kim Hait, who had 7 kids, 7 boys, and they were all Kohanim Gedolim. Everyone, I mean, that's incredible. And they asked her, what merit? Did you do something special, some mitzvah, some segula? Did you wear chamsa? I mean, what did you do? Right, I know. What was it? And she said, no, I was always careful that not even the beams of my house should see my hair uncovered. The beams, you know, it's one thing for a woman not to show her hair, a married woman, before other people, but she was so careful with this hair covering that even in her own home, and she, of course, merited to have 7 Kohanim Gedolim. They even say that the mother of the Chazon Ish was once asked, Chazon Ish, great rabbi of the past generation, did you do anything special to merit such a son? And she said, well, the only thing that she can remember is that she was also careful that even when she bathed, you know, in those days they didn't have showers. It was like you had women pour over you water or, you know. And she says, even when I was doing that, I had women cover my hair with a sadin, with a sheet. As much as possible not to leave her hair uncovered. Obviously, we see from all of these ma'asim, all of these stories, that the tzeniut obviously had an effect on the kids. Another pasuk in Tehillim that says just the opposite. Asher ish asher lo alach b'atzat reshaim. It was fortunate is the person that does not go in the ways of the wicked. In other words, be careful not to do what other people are doing that is wrong. And if you do so, obviously you will be spared from all the terrible influences out there in the street. The problem is that people don't realize how dangerous these influences are, and they say it's okay to be with them, to watch a game with them. They don't realize that this company And this kind of influence is very detrimental to the neshama. You should know, this is a very difficult challenge. This is not an easy challenge. The area of tzniut, and we'll be going over some examples, are not easy whatsoever, but they're very important. So let's begin with a few examples or halachot that one has to be very careful in when it comes to tzniut of the bigud, of the dress code. Women and men have to be careful not to wear tight clothes. Tight. Bgadim smudim. The tight clothes tends to bring out certain figures, certain shapes, and of course that's a problem. Careful with short clothes. That's for the women especially. Careful with transparent clothing. Careful with colors that are very, very bright, especially red. And with the areas like the sharvulim, the sleeves and the neck and the back, where if there is a slit, I think they call it. All of these little things that can sometimes be not sanua. These are areas that one has to be careful if one wants to dress properly. A woman is told to be extra careful in tzniut much more than a man, because she has the ability, because of her nature, to be machshil, chas v'shalom, to cause men to look at her. Which brings up a very, very sensitive question. Wigs. Wigs, yeah. Importance of head covering, I think most of us know. The married woman, even if she's a widow, even if she's been divorced, needs to have her hair covered. Head covering is part of the tzniut, because the se'ar, the hair of a woman, is considered the erva. It attracts. It's attractive. And attraction can be a problem. So what about wigs? Now, I wasn't intending to speak about wigs because it's a whole halachic discussion, but I want you to understand this whole idea of wigs logically, common sense. And then you will make your own decision. Wigs always existed. They always existed. Women sometimes needed a wig. The reason why wigs in the past were not so much a problem is because they didn't look like hair. Or it was clearly not tempting because people were able to detect that it's not real. Some were made from goat's hair, plastic, it was not so impressive. But it covered the hair and it looked like something, In many of the Mediterranean countries, the Sephardic communities, they didn't even have those things. They always covered their hair with, depending on what the custom of that country was. Scarves, all kinds of scarves, or tichels as they called in Yiddish. They didn't have these kinds of things that they called wigs like they had in Europe. Now, today there's a big problem. It's called human hair. Now, what's the problem with human hair? Even though it's not your hair, I'm telling you just common sense. Even though it's not your hair and it's something detached, and it's a wig, yes, the problem with human hair is like this. I want to reassure all the women who think that it's okay, that it's not so okay. It's not 100%. Even though there are some rabbis who might say, okay, let me tell you why not. If God forbid, once in her life, this woman got a man to look at her and stare at her because of her human hair wig, she's already committed the big sin. Was it worth it? Let's say a wig is mutar. Let's say it's mutar. It's a wig, like some of the rabbis say. But because of this wig, if she ever got a man to look at her in the wrong way, because she was attractive as a result of this human hair that looks very much like her hair, and sometimes, by the way, these wigs look even better than their hair. If she was if she got away with it, and throughout her whole 40, 50 years of wearing a human wig, she never tempted anybody, she never really got anybody to look at her, well, then she's lucky. But if she ever did, that would be proof that it was wrong, because it got somebody to stare at her in the wrong way. And the whole idea of covering the hair is not so nobody should stare at her, except for her husband. So if the wig does not accomplish that, but on the contrary tempts one to look at her, wow, then we know that it's wrong. Well, that's, I think, the simple test that everybody should do. But the reason why this is not unfortunately discussed enough, even though it is talked about, but not enough, because it is a very, very difficult thing for many, many women to stop owning, and to change their custom, to change the way they do things. And that's why, it's very difficult to convince them. But if you use common sense and you understand the logic behind covering the hair, then the woman would wear either something so synthetic that it's not attractive, it looks okay but not attractive, or to cover her hair with a tichel. How is a tichel called in English?
Tichel is
A hat cover of some sort, a scarf, yeah, or a hat, or something that does not show too much of the hair. That's all. Yes.
I want to say, I heard from Rabbi Waxman that he feels that they should make mechitza in the hallways, not just only mechitza in the social hall,
Right.
rather in the hallway to get to the social hall. He said after the chuppah,
Yeah. Right.
men
We're gonna get to that.
so much.
I'm gonna talk about that too. This is concerning the dress code. This is concerning covering the hair. Covering the hair has always been something very, very important in Judaism. A woman that did not want to cover her hair, a husband was allowed to divorce her. In other words, she was basically not sticking to Jewish tradition. Let me tell you an incredible story that is known. Some say that it happened in Morocco. Some say that it happened in Tunisia. And some say that it happened during the Inquisition. There was a young girl, who was found guilty of some things that she never, of course, did. But the Goyim were just looking for an excuse to put her to death, and her death was going to be a very cruel death. They were going to have her hair tied to the tail of a horse, and have her dragged all over the streets. That is how she would die, from being dragged. And they went over to her and they asked her, "Do you have a last request?" And she said, "Yes. Can you please give me some machatim, some needles, pins?" She wanted to make sure that her dress would hold on tight to her legs. As she's being dragged in the streets, chaz v'shalom, she should not become not sanua, not modest for one moment. So she asked for the pins to be put into her flesh to hold her dress tight into her legs. Incredible story, incredible example of the tzniut that all along throughout our history, our mothers always demonstrated. As far as conduct is something very, very important, which Rabbi Manila mentioned also, is a problem sometimes in wedding halls. Mixed dancing is obviously something which is forbidden completely. There should be no doubt about that. But it's not only mixed dancing, it's ideal, if possible, to separate the men and the women and not have them together in the same location. Dancing is, of course, forbidden. Dancing is a real issue, but when people are together, it can lead to all kinds of issues and problems. So if it's possible, ideally, they should not sit together. Now, at your home, in your dining room on Shabbat, it's one thing, but when there's a lot of men, a lot of women sitting next to each other, it can be a problem. So ideally, there should be a separation of the two. People have a hard time why we separate the men and women during the prayer. What's prayer for? To pray to Hashem. You don't want to be distracted. Men are distracted if they see a woman. That's just their nature. So if you're a woman who loves you love your husband so much you can't let go of him, let go of him for a couple hours when he's praying. Nothing will happen. Let him focus on the prayer. And I'm saying this, of course, to those who just somehow need to sit next to their husband. What are they afraid of? What's going to happen? He's not going to go away. He's not going to... Just leave him alone for a couple hours. Let him focus. He's weak. If he sees a woman next to him, he'll look at the woman. So for his own good, not because men look down at women. Chas v'shalom. The mechitza, the division, or putting them on the second floor is for the benefit of the men. The men need to protect themselves. They need to be focused on the prayer. They can't be distracted. Chatan v'kala, they're recently engaged. they have to be careful. They like each other so much, of course, that they can't have enough of each other, you know. You have to be careful. There's no touching, there's no kissing until after you're married. Not everybody knows that. It's a sur. Some people have a problem. In some cultures, everybody kisses each other. You kiss the mother-in-law, you kiss you kiss the friend, you kiss this, you're kissing other couples. It's not permissible. I mean, women with women, fine. Men with men, fine. But a man kissing somebody else's wife, like they do in France, and I think in Iran too, yeah? Only Iranians here? Back home they didn't do it? Otherwise they would hang them, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a good thing, yeah? Anyway, what kind of a custom is that? That's an ugly custom of the Goyim, right? It's an ugly custom of the Goyim. A woman is something private. She belongs to her husband, not to another man. You know, what are you doing? Not even shaking the hand. There's no permission to do that. Right? It's a sur. There's a certain distance between men and women in the Torah. You can't just talk as much as you want to another woman unless you're dating her, unless you're a relative of hers, unless you need to give her some important information. Just to have a talk and to be intimate is a sur, is a problem. There's ilchot of yichud. Yichud means not to be a man and a woman who's not his daughter, not his mother, not his grandmother, not his sister, not his wife, cannot be in the same room that is locked.
His sister has a hefty for 30 days.
Yes, that's if they have to be together, right? But there's rules governing yichud because the rabbis tell us, en apotrofos le'arayot, there's nobody that can guarantee that nothing will happen in the area of arayot. In other words, in this area of forbidden relationships, that people can make a mistake. Mixed swimming is also a problem, whether it's in a swimming pool or in a beach. You can't go mixed swimming. You can't allow, if you're a woman, you can't allow men to look at you. It requires a certain amount of, of awareness that certain places you just can't go swimming. You have to go to a beach where there are no men, or there's very rarely somebody passing by. Otherwise, it's a problem. Looking at women also, just to look for no reason, it's a problem. The Gemara has many, many warnings for people who have this weakness that, Chas v'shalom, they're gonna have to suffer the consequences of this. It's unless they do teshuvah for this, it's something very, very serious that we shouldn't take lightly. It helps to live in a Jewish neighborhood, obviously, where we don't have to have all this junk and all this garbage around us. It's important, of course, to attend schools where they separate the girls from the boys. If you have a choice, if you're a woman, you have a choice between a man or a woman doctor, obviously choose the woman doctor, even though a man doctor is a lot of work on you because he's working. If you have a choice, a man, of course, cannot go to a woman doctor. But if taking a haircut, you should not take a haircut by a woman if you're a man. There's Baruch Hashem enough men giving haircuts. There's no reason to put yourself in that situation. What I want to do for the next 5 minutes is just share with you the incredible stories of men and women in the past who, for them, it was just normal, natural, common sense to even give their life. The Gemara tells a story of, I think, 300 boys and girls, I think it was, that were taken prisoners by the Romans, I think it was. They were taken captive, they were put on a boat, and after a while on the boat, they figured out, the boys and girls were able to figure out where they were being taken. In the beginning, they didn't know, captives being sold into slavery. No, they eventually figured out, I guess they overheard, that they were being sold into prostitution, the boys and the girls. And the girls made a decision after hearing that they're going to give their lives up and not to allow the Goyim to defile them. And they threw themselves overboard. The boys saw that. If the women were capable of doing that, even though it's not the same, for them it's worse in a sense. For women, they don't have to give their lives for that. But if they were willing to give their lives for that, the boys, of course, use that as an example and courageously threw themselves overboard too. On that, the Shekhinah says, Al elle ani bochiyah, I cry for these righteous souls that unfortunately died. Another incredible story that happened more recently was in the Holocaust. There was a woman who was in charge of a group of girls. And she always taught them and told them, amongst other things, that prepare yourself that one of these days you may have to go al Kiddush Hashem, give up your life. And she prepared for them in case they need to go al Kiddush Hashem. She prepared for them poison. One day the German Gestapo arrived and told her, tell all the girls to get ready, shower, and dress with the nicest clothing, because tomorrow 93 soldiers are coming. And she understood what that meant, 93 soldiers coming to visit them. And the teacher told the girls, the time has come for you to prepare yourself. As soon as they get close to you, just take the poison. And that's what they all did. They said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. They took the pill, and they all died, not willing to defile themselves. Another incredible story of how this area of Arayot is so powerful, one who is careful with it, merits tremendous amount of reward, was a story that happened, I think it happened in the late 70s or early 80s in Israel. As you remember, those days there was a lot of bus bombings. So there was this man who went up one of the buses, and as he's entering the bus, unfortunately, he sees a woman who was very, very not modest, and he looks away. He goes further down the bus, encounters another woman who's very, very immodest in the way she was dressed, and looks away, did not look at her, and decides, well, there's so many immodest women sitting in this bus, I'm going to sit in the back of the bus. So he sat all the way in the back of the bus. As the bus is traveling, he falls asleep. He falls asleep, and in his dream, he sees somebody coming to him. Get up, get up. There is a bomb underneath your seat. So he figures it's just a dream. So he went back to his nap. The second time around, the same guy comes to him in the dream. Get up quickly, there's a bomb underneath your seat. So this time he decided to check, and sure enough, he saw the wires, and he saw the bag, and he immediately alerted the driver. The driver stopped, everybody got out, and sure enough, Baruch Hashem, they were able to disarm this bomb. Okay, so far so good. Now this man traveled to see the Baba Sali. He went to Netivot. I guess he used to go there from time to time. And as soon as he entered the room where the Baba Sali was, the Baba Sali says, you know what zechut you had to see the dream? The Baba Sali already knew everything just by looking at him. You know what merit you had to see the dream twice? Because twice you did not look up to those immodest women. So twice you had the dream to be able to save. Only you were able to save the people on the bus because you had this zechut. You had a zechut. Very easy to pick up your eyes, very easy to stare and look around, especially if it's right in your eyes. To control yourself and not to stare, it was a tremendous zechut. Unfortunately, there was the opposite story too. Also, I think it was in the 90s. There was a girl who was very not modest in a bus. And she was standing. There was no room. So she was standing. And there was a religious guy standing next to her. So she asked the religious man, can you tell me what time it is? So he tells her. About 2 minutes later, can you tell me what time it is? She tells her again. She asked him several times. She says, why are you asking me so much what time it is? He says, you don't understand. I come from a religious family. And I'm not so religious. And even though in my home they were always modest, I decided that this is the way I want to dress. She was very, very immodest. And recently my mother has been warning me in a dream to be careful, to dress properly. She's been begging me and warning me. And I didn't listen. Last night she came to me one more time and she says, this is the last time I'm coming to you. If you don't do teshuvah, I'm taking you today at 5 p.m. And this was in Rehov Allenby in Tel Aviv. As soon as this girl got out of the bus, it was 5 p.m., she was run over by the bus. How was she run over by the bus? Because exactly at 5 p.m., the lights didn't work. You know, the red-green lights. the street lights, all of a sudden stopped working, and so the bus, one of the buses, just ran over her at exactly 5 p.m., exactly the way her mother told her, and warned her. Now you may ask, why her? Well, if she came from a religious family, obviously it was much more severe. It was a serious matter, and she warned her. Anyway, just to finish up, all the blessings, Bil'am gave many, many blessings to Am Yisrael, to the Jewish nation. Many blessings. One blessing, which is one of the most powerful blessings, is Matovu Alecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Israel. He was impressed how he was able to see that the Jewish people are so careful in their modesty, how their tents were not facing each other, so no one should see what's going on in the other tent. This is a tremendous zechut for Am Yisrael that always has been. The Jewish people were always very, very careful in all these areas of kedusha and modesty. And women especially, throughout the history of the Jewish nation, were always the heroines. As it says the Midrash in Mitzrayim, B'zchut nashim tzidkaniot. Our forefathers left Egypt because of the merit of our righteous mothers. The women, through their righteousness, through their carefulness in this area, they had a tremendous merit. And it's through their merit that Mashiach is going to come too. The women have a tremendous role to play in this area. Now this area is extremely important, especially in the generation of Mashiach, because two great rabbis during the time of the Baal Shem Tov, a little bit after, sat down and discussed among themselves, what is it of all the things that we can think of that is holding the Mashiach from coming, delaying him so much? Each one said something else, but they were both right. One said, is because Jews are not careful enough in the shuls. They talk when they're not supposed to talk. They don't answer amen when they're supposed to answer amen. This is a very important area. One has to be extremely careful not to talk when you're not supposed to talk, not to talk nonsense, and especially to answer amen every single time it should be answered. This is a tremendous accusation. Chaz v'shalom, if people are not careful, not respectful of what? Of the kedusha of a Bet HaKnesset. So that's also holiness, the holiness of a shul. And the other rabbi said also a very true thing. It's because of the lack of tzniut, unfortunately, in this generation. The lack of modesty, unfortunately, that many, many amongst the Jewish people have learned from the ways of the Goyim, that it's okay to dress provocative, it's okay to talk like them, it's okay to conduct themselves like them. So that, of course, brings a tremendous accusation. So therefore, we know that these are the two important areas that we need to work on. And if we work on and we're careful on in the kedusha of the Bet HaKnesset and the kedusha of the tzniut of the home, we will, B'ezrat Hashem, have the merit of bringing the Mashiach Amen very soon.